Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figure It Out Baseball. We've got a great Figure It Out Baseball podcast today for you. We have Ross Trachtenberg joining us on the program. He is a returner to the podcast again and one of the top contributors really for videos on the Figure It Out Baseball website. Ross Trachtenberg is currently the recruiting coordinator at Westchester University, a very decorated Division II program in southeastern Pennsylvania. I'll give you a background on Coach Trachtenberg before we jump into questions with him. He is a graduate of Lehigh University, graduated from there in 2002, got his master's degree from Drexel in 2015. In his coaching career, he was the head coach at Friend Central School, high school in Wynnewood, Pennsylvania. That was from 2004 to 2013. In 2011 and 13, the team won the league title. In 2014, he got into the college ranks. He started at Newman University, a Division III in Aston, Pennsylvania, where he was the recruiting coordinator and the head coach of the JV program. In 2015, he took a job in California at Ponoma Pitzer College, another Division III. This is in Claremont, California. At Ponoma Pitzer, he was an assistant coach recruiting coordinator. Then in 2016, he got hired at Westchester. That's the spring of 2016. He has been at Westchester since. He acts as the hitting coach, catcher's coach, recruiting coordinator for Westchester. In 2016, his first year there, the team went 37-14. They won the conference championship, went to the NCAA regional, had 2 all-conference players that year. In 2017, the team actually won the Division II World Series, and an unbelievable feat. They finished with a 44-11 record. The team had 1 All-American and 4 players named to the all-conference team in 2017. The next year in 2018, the team went 31-17. They were ranked as high as number 2 in the country that year again, went to the NCAA regional tournament. They had 3 All-Americans on that team. They had a 34th round draft pick. They had a player tied the single-season home run record with 13. They had the conference player of the year. They had a player who hit .469, which led all of the NCAA Division II. Then this past year in 2019, the team went 31-16. It was the 4th straight season with 30-plus wins. Also, the team's 4th straight trip to the regional tournament in NCAA Division II. Coach Trachtenberg coached 2 all-region players last year, including one that was named the Region Player of the Year. He was an All-American. He was named Conference Male Scholar Athlete of the Year, as well as leading the region with a .438 batting average. Coach Trachtenberg has been an associate scout with the Pittsburg Pirates since 2011. Ross, appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to dive into some more baseball info. We're in the wintertime here in Pennsylvania, so it's really exciting to talk baseball now.
Exciting just to think about it in any way possible. I was just reading some articles before I came just to that's kind of how you get through the day for me, just to get a little baseball fix here and there. So I'd like to talk a little more specifically than the first podcast that you and I did together, and today we'd like to talk specifically about recruiting. I think it's a topic that a lot of listeners to the program, it's a popular topic, and it's something that I think among high school coaches, travel coaches, obviously high school players, it's a hot button topic that really there's not an incredible amount of information out there for people to try to figure out this process, to try to navigate through the recruiting process. So let's try to get into some depth about some things today and just try to help people to understand what's happening on your end as a recruiting coordinator. Let me just start by kind of asking, you guys have had a lot of success there at Westchester. You've had some players that have done some really, really special things. Is that more attributed to the caliber of player that is recruited to your place, or is that more attributed to, the work that's done on campus? I know there's a combination of both. But if you had to point to one or the other, is it more about development, or is it more about, it's got to start with the recruiting of the right players?
Yeah, it's a great question and a tough one to answer. I'd say the combination. But if you don't recruit the right guys, then the player development piece, I think there's only so much you can do. So if you're not recruiting the right people with the right type of work ethic, then the hours you want to put in, they're not going to be useful. If you're not recruiting the right students academically, then they end up not being eligible, and now you're without players. So you can develop them all you want, but they don't have a 2.0 GPA, so now they're not eligible when the season comes along. So I think obviously it goes hand in hand, but I think the recruitment piece, it's really tough to be successful if you don't recruit the type of people, the type of students, and the type of athletes that you'd like to have in your program.
So there's a couple questions I'd like to ask, but you shoot some video on the website where you talk about a lot of different things in the recruiting process, and one of which that you get into is just really, what players need to do off the field to have a chance to play, to be eligible. Can we talk about that just for a minute first? When you are recruiting student athletes, what do you need to see from a high school student athlete to know that he is going to be eligible to play once he's on campus? Like, what does a kid need to make sure he's doing all the boxes he needs to be checking?
Yeah, so on the academic end, essentially? Yes. Yeah, so academically, there is the NCAA Eligibility Center that athletes need to go through if they're looking to play NAIA or junior college, and those standards don't quite apply the same way they do for NCAA institutions. But coming out of high school, there is a sliding scale with standardized scores and with your GPA. So the 2.2 coming out of high school is what you need to be essentially eligible, and then when you're in the school, the 2.0 is what you need to maintain, plus a number of credits taken per year, per semester, or quarter, depending on the school. Every school has a compliance officer, so whenever we do have a student that we're considering as a freshman coming in or even a transfer, that there's kind of any question marks, any gray area, as coaches, we've got to go through our compliance officer. So and every NCAA school has somebody in their department that does that. So for that student athlete and family that they're kind of questioning, hey, is my son going to be eligible essentially? Again, kind of asking the coach to have the transcript looked at by the compliance officer is going to be the best step. And that's the kind of the coach's role there. The student athlete and the parents don't need to go to that compliance person directly. That would be pretty much for every sport too. So, there may be, families with softball players that are listening to this or other sports, just making sure that the eligibility piece is in place. And that's, again, going into, your freshman year out of high school, and then also the transfer piece too comes into play to make sure you've taken your credits. You don't want to end up on campus and then find out, oh, I can't play my freshman year, or I have to sit out a year or a semester because of whatever rule.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I have heard. I don't know if you have heard this, but I've heard this as a college coach. I'm sure you've at least heard of it, if not heard it yourself. But what about the parent who's listening to this or the coach listening to this that says, like, yeah, but this kid's really good, so you guys, you're going to have to make an exception for this kid. Is there such thing as an exception academically?
So for NCAA purposes, no. So it's pretty cut and dry, and we've certainly had some really talented players interested in Westchester or on campus, and we want to get them on the field, and we take it to compliance and no, the student hasn't taken the credits or they didn't do what they needed to do GPA-wise. So a specific story would be, a high school player of ours that we recruited, we made a a scholarship offer to going into a senior year, and academically said, you need to go in the right direction opposed to the wrong direction, like you're kind of teetering. Admissions is on board, you'll have to do a summer session. That's open to the university, but that'd be a good first step for you. And the student went in the wrong direction essentially during the senior year, kind of nailed it in because he figured he had an offer, and got to the point where not only could we not accept him, but he wasn't going to be eligible to play anywhere NCAA-wise. Said player went to junior college, and that's perfectly fine, and academically it ended up probably being the right place for the student to kind of get his act together. So this was a pitcher that we would have loved to have part of our program, but our hands are tied not only by our own admission office, but by the NCAA at that point. So as much as we would have liked to see him, we couldn't kind of push him through. Okay. And then I think the other piece to it is every school has their admission standards. And for baseball, it's not a revenue-generating sport anywhere in the country, really. So the pull that a coach may have is not that great when we're talking about academics. There's academic support for all students and student athletes. But when we're recruiting a player, and I say this, we being, college coaches, we want the right fit baseball-wise, but we should also be looking for the right fit academically. So Westchester specifically, as, we like to see students that have a 3.0. So that 2.5 student, like, we could go to admissions and fight for that player to get in, but if that player comes in as a 2.5 and struggles and now he's a 2.2 and even slipping further down, have we really done a service to that player? Is that player going to be so focused on catching up academically that those pluses that they're bringing baseball-wise, they get forgotten because the student's so bogged down with study hall hours, meeting with teachers, and just the stress of not doing well academically. So, we could push a little bit, and you hear about that little bit of leeway potentially for guys, but, in the end, are we doing a service to that athlete by trying to kind of force his way into a university? And every admission office is a little different. Every university and coaching staff has different philosophies there. But I think in general, we all want the best for the student athlete.
It's an important answer for people to know how that works, and to know that if you don't get it done in the classroom, there's really not a lot of leeway, like you said, with college baseball teams. Let's kind of dive into your initial answer as far as just, whether it's development or recruiting, and you just mentioned that you got to have the right guy, the right people with the right work ethic, the academic part of it. When you're out recruiting, how do you know when you see the right guy, the right people, the right work ethic? What is it, what you're seeing with your own eyes? Are you, talking to coaches? Like, how do you just identify the guy that's the right fit for Westchester?
So and it's a question that we get a lot, and it's, there's not a short answer, unfortunately. And every coach in the country would probably answer this question a little bit differently. Hopefully, our 4 coaches that are out recruiting, all say the same thing, at Westchester at least, but, if you talk to the next school, they're looking for something a little bit differently. But, for us, I think it's a combination of everything, and, we do work with a limited roster, so we need to be really sure about guys. So we don't have kind of the room to redshirt players or have an expanded roster with the JV program included. So the let's find out how he does once he gets on campus approach is not something that we can do. Other schools kind of have that flexibility. When I was at Newman and there was a junior varsity program, you could take flyers on a lot of guys because, they were going to get an opportunity to play as freshmen on JV, if not on, if they weren't quite ready for varsity. So we're in a different situation at Westchester. So again, kind of making sure so we see the player with our own eyes. We get to kind of see how they, certainly handle themselves, handle adversity on the field, handle success, how they compete. Those are some intangibles you don't get unless you see them in person. But usually we're getting, we're starting the whole process with email communication with the player, talking to their summer coaches or their high school coaches, certainly advisors that might be in the mix there. We certainly hear from them. So I think a big key to managing this process on the coaches end, from our side, is trying to do a whole lot of kind of research on players before we go out. So the concept of going to a field to see if there's any players there, or a tournament to say, hey, who's good here, that's not a really good use of our resources. So what we try and do is before any tournament that we might be attending, before any showcase, it's, essentially know who we're going there to see ahead of time. And that's, do they have a 3.0 or close to a GPA? Do we think, measurables wise, do we have a good feel of how fast they run, how hard they throw? So when we go there, we have an expectation of, okay, this is about what we should see from a player. It can be pretty rare that you go and you're totally shocked that there's this amazing player there that you've never heard of, never seen, nobody's ever kind of, turned over for you. It's kind of hard to hide prior to an event. So I think for us, it's doing our homework ahead of time, essentially, so when we are out there on the road, which we are a good amount, we have a game plan going into it.
It's like a lot of work.
But it definitely pays off. these events can be overwhelming, whether it's a tournament or showcase style or even your own camp, but they can be overwhelming for the player. On the coach's side, if you're not going into it prepared, if you're not going into it, with a good feel of who you're going to see, it's very overwhelming for us too.
Does a player we're going to the 2020 season. Does a guy in 2020 need to play travel ball to legitimately be seen and like get enough at bats where coaches are able to see him? And I'm asking just, in case there's somebody out here who kind of has that question. If does someone need to play travel ball, or is high school and maybe Legion enough? From your experience, how often are you recruiting guys that don't play travel baseball?
Yeah, I think, in this area in Pennsylvania, kind of travel ball, the summer travel circuit is more popular than the Legion circuit. Now, it was different, whatever it was, 20 years ago. Our starting, shortstop, Justin Horn, we saw him, I had a relationship with his head high school coach, had a good rec on him from there. Good stats. We saw him at one showcase event, and he played Legion ball, and he came to one of our camps, and that was enough. And he's an interesting one. Can kind of get into the two-sport athlete, multi-sport athlete. He played football. He was a starting quarterback for his high school football team. So much of his time was devoted there as well. So he couldn't quite do that full summer circuit and fall circuit anyway, because he had to be with the football team too. And it certainly didn't take away from his ability to, be seen, and his ability to, find the right fit for him. And for us, certainly we're really happy with him being a main part of our program for what will be a 4-year career. I think the benefit of the travel ball or kind of the showcase teams a lot of times can be coaching staffs there that can help talk parents and their players through the process and kind of get them to play at a high level, things like that. And it's not 100% of the time, but I think there is something to that where their business model, the summer teams, the showcase teams, is essentially to help those players get some form of exposure and connection with college programs. The high school season, just relying on the high school season, I think the main difficulty there is just the opportunity for college coaches to get out to see them because we're busy with our own schedules. So the reality of how many high school games we get to is it's pretty minimal. We're going to see players at the end of their seasons when they might be in a playoffs type of a situation. And then our goal is the guys we've identified, we're going to get to see them early in the summer. But in terms of, if they're a pitcher and we can see them pitch a Legion game, hey, that can be certainly good enough for us that we can get a feel for the player. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I don't know if there's one way or another. But I think that, again, finding the right place where the player is going to kind of thrive is an important piece to that.
Okay. If a kid is sort of that, well, for whatever reason, if a kid is under the radar and believes that he can play for you, but you have no idea who he is, what's the best way for that kid to legitimately get on your radar?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that's not a complex one. I think the easiest thing is to email me directly. And you do this with any college in the country. You find the recruiting coordinator and or the head coach, and you give us the basic information that, every coach wants to know, which is, where your academic standards, do you have a chance to be a good fit for the academic side of the school? And then if you have measurables such as velocity, 60 times, exit velo, if you don't, that's perfectly fine. And then video. And video used to be a really complex thing with VHS recording devices and trying to figure out how to edit those. That's certainly not the case now. So clipping off some videos on your phone of some batting practice swings. If you're a pitcher, a short bullpen session, just starting with that. If I've got maybe a 30-second clip on a player, and just some of that other basic information about academics, that's probably enough for me to make an initial read in probably less than a minute to say, yeah, this is a potential fit, or this is not quite meeting what we're looking for generally.
Okay. Let's talk about the recruiting video for a minute. If someone's going to send you a recruiting video and they want to do a good one, like best possible video to give you the best look, how long do you want that to be, and what do you want to include? I know you just said if it's a pitcher, just a bullpen. If it's a hitter, just some BP swings. Is there anything else, like in the ideal video, what would you like to see? How long would you like that to be?
Yeah, for sure. And there are some videos, like you mentioned, that I've created for Figured Out Baseball that address this specifically, so have probably more details than I might cover now. But I think first of all, it doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be done by a professional. Just basically make sure we can see the full body, make sure we can see kind of what you're doing. So if you're a pitcher, like, let us see the whole body. Let us see the ball coming to the catcher. And don't worry if you feel like you're missing something, because if a coach wants to see more, they'll just ask for more. So, I prefer, if I had a choice, to see in-game video from behind home plate. So if you send me a bullpen session and it's, February and you're doing that inside or in a practice setting and there's no batter, that's perfectly fine. That's a good starting point. And if I want to see more, I'll simply ask for more. So I think, from the pitching perspective, that behind home plate view is, a great one to have if possible. The hitting view, for hitters, I like to see the open side, so you're looking at essentially the chest of the hitter. In-game video can be tough to get, and I don't need to see a 12-pitch at bat that ends in a walk. I'd rather see, cut the clip down a little bit to when you're swinging and making contact. I like to see batting practice swings, and that can be on a field or in a batting cage, but still, same thing, kind of being able to look at the open side of the hitter and see 5 to 10 swings. I think that can be really useful. The things you want to avoid doing is doing your videos from very far away, that the player is just a speck on the field, and we get game footage, and I'm not quite sure which player on the field I'm supposed to be looking at in the video, because you can see a lot of action going on. So kind of be clear with, like, it's zoomed in on the person that I'm supposed to be watching.
Okay.
Fielding can be a little bit more difficult, particularly getting game footage. So for that, I think the easiest is to do just kind of a practice setting, and infielder just a close-up of some ground balls being fielded and thrown, and then maybe some zoomed out so you can see a throw from across the diamond, and kind of same concept for the outfielder. But those, again, they can be a little bit more difficult to actually film. So again, if you kind of start with the hitting piece and start with the pitching stuff, catchers, watching you receive and watching a couple throwdowns, again, it's a starting point. And getting back to your, kind of initial question, that 60 to 90 second video is plenty. And again, the coach that's interested is just going to simply ask for more.
And you are actually, if someone sends you a video, excuse me, if someone sends you an email with video, you're actually going to watch it. You're not just going to delete it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, as long as, if I see that the GPA is 2.2, then I may not get to the point where I open it. If it's 2.2 and say a 2020 right now, yeah, there's very little that I can do. Just because I'm curious, I'll still open up the video, but just to get a feel, because the other thing is that player may end up going to, say, a junior college or maybe a post-grad year, and now we're interested in them a year later. The academics are in line, so it's kind of, even though it makes no sense right now academically, it may certainly in a year or 2 years down the road, or even 3. So kind of, I'm not quite doing my job if I don't at least open up that email. To me, generally, the email links are kind of a little bit easier. You don't have to worry about what device, the coach is on. They don't have to download something, which can take a long time. The links are easy to share from one coach to another, rather than potentially sending a large file.
Link to like a YouTube videos.
Yeah, I think link to YouTube is really easy. Twitter is certainly fine too. Just make sure your Twitter account is all appropriate on there, which it should be anyway. But yes, I think that's the easiest thing. I would say for the families out there, don't expect a college coach to continually check a player's YouTube account to see, oh, is there potentially new video? So if you add new video, essentially, email the coaches again, or if you're at a text message, level with that coach, it's just send a note, say, hey, I added a new video. Here's the link for it again. Don't kind of assume that we're going to go on there on our own to do it. We've got a pretty big database that we're working through.
And you can hear more about this topic from Coach Trachtenberg at figureitoutbaseball.com. It's a free resource for young baseball players and coaches just to learn more about a lot of places in the game, a lot of things about the game. And Coach Trachtenberg's got a lot of video on there, especially in the neighborhood of recruiting. I got a lot of stuff on there. So have you ever signed a guy just based on video alone without going to see him in person?
Absolutely not. It's just not to say that it's not truthful on the video, but you can just see so much more in person, even a bullpen session where you feel like you got everything you need to see in that 15-pitch bullpen, and the player comes in and essentially does the same exact thing for you. In Division II, we can actually have players come in and work out for us, essentially a tryout. That's a Division II rule that Division I and III can't use, but they're going to show us exactly what we saw on video. But we do have that opportunity when we see a player live to see, what's kind of their body language before, during, and after their workout. How do they react if they spike a pitch in a bullpen setting, the warm-up, the cool-down, and all that. And again, for us, we've got with a limited roster size, we do need to, be sure about guys. So, and kind of going off of that, if you look at our roster, primarily Pennsylvania residents, because we're a state school, so tuition's lower, and the guys that are out of state, or Delaware, New Jersey, are close enough by, we get to see them multiple times. So the player that I get information from outside of our region and sends video, usually that's what I have to kind of rely on. And the reason a lot of those guys haven't really kind of ended up on campus is just the ability for us to see them in person. And haven't you seen enough on video? I said, yeah, I have, but, I need to see you in person. But, unless you're showing me something different in person than I'm seeing on the video, it's not worth you, traveling across the country to come to a camp or whatever it may be. So, getting back to your initial question, the video is a great starting point for me to say, yeah, it's worth it. We'd love to see you in person, love to see what you can do. If you can show us this in person and more, this could be really good. Or, a lot of times it's, just based on this video, you're not quite there. It's very fair for players to ask for feedback. What do you mean specifically? Just be, open to receiving some feedback to say, it's not worth it for you to, essentially, put yourself out there to attend this showcase we're going to be at, or come to our camp to expect, something's going to come out of it. If I can see the video and tell you, you still have development to do. And from my perspective, I'm never going to tell a player, you can never play at Westchester, because I can't tell you, what the player will look like in 6 months. But I can say at this point, there's not enough there for us to move forward with you as a recruit.
Let's talk a little bit specifically about each different positions. Mm-hmm. And kind of, what you're specifically looking for. Let's just talk about hitters first, just to, take away everything else that we've kind of already talked about, or you've talked about, just, the work ethic, what the guy's like, how he's handling success and failure, things like that. A guy's in the batter's box. What do you want to see? What are some tools that, you're taking notes on a guy? What do you like to see from a hitter, Ross, that will tell you that he can hit at your level?
Yeah, and it's, we talk about the eye test, and it's what I see compared to the next person sees with their EYE eye, not I personally. So, I like to see a hitter that can repeat his mechanics. And what that tells me is there's some physical strength there, and there's also muscle memory there, because the player's taken a million swings. So when guys say, oh, I work out, I swing 100 times a day every single day, and I see the video and every swing is different. They're falling over after half of the swings and don't reset their feet into the same position. I don't feel like there's one way to hit. If you look at our hitters, if you come watch us take BP, our guys have different stances. Their hands are in different positions. But my goal with them is to be consistent with it. So when we're recruiting players, we want to start with that there is a work ethic there, and there's a method to the work ethic where they're trying to, again, as a high school player, they're trying to kind of do the same thing over and over again. And then the second piece would be that it matches their ability level. So, the really big, strong guy that has a super short, choppy swing, that doesn't match well. So how much work would that player need when they get on campus to say, you're 6'4" and strong, you shouldn't be trying to hit a ground ball to third base and beat it out, but that's what your swing looks like. And then obviously the opposite's true, the guy that's 5'8" and, is swinging for the fences, but when they max out and have a huge, huge hit for them, it's a pop-up to center field. And they're a fast runner, so let's, if they get on campus, that's going to take us a while to kind of adjust to have them be successful against a really high level of pitching.
Okay. Between a guy that's very toolsy but isn't currently experiencing a lot of success in the game compared to a guy who, doesn't really stand out tools-wise, but you've seen him a number of times, and he just seems to square the ball up and just seems to get a lot of hits. Between those two, which guy is more attractive to you?
That's a really tough question.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say both, and I'd like to say neither. To be fair, so with the player that kind of just continues to get it done, but doesn't do anything kind of super flashy, the 60 time's not amazing, the exit speed's not amazing. For that kid, we like to essentially see him in tougher and tougher environments. So for a hitter specifically, it's okay, he's doing that against high school level pitching. How can we see this player against tougher pitching? So if we're in a camp setting, can we see him hit against a pitching machine with raised up velocity? If they come to a camp, and I think this would be a specific one, either coming to our camp or we see him at another event, and when it lines up really nicely, we see the kid that we want to see hit, and he happens to be hitting against one of the top pitchers at the event that's throwing, say, 85 to 86 and has a breaking ball. It's like, okay, this is the type of pitcher we're interested in, the type of hitter we're interested in. Let's see how this kind of matchup looks. And a lot of times, we see kind of one falter or the other. It's that hitter that kind of does it great all the time, but when they face upper velocity, then they can't quite handle it. So that can be a telling point for us. The player that's really toolsy and has that bat speed and that flash, it's the same thing. It's, okay, if you get in there against somebody throwing a decent breaking ball, even, average breaking ball, and you're nowhere close to it, we say, yeah, you've got this bat speed that's over 100, but, you get into our conference and you'll get a full weekend of breaking balls. You won't see a fastball all weekend. There's not much we can do with that player either. But, there is the attraction side of that player that has super athletic abilities, and do we think, with time they can get there? So, again, both have attractive pieces, and for us, I'd say we just would keep kind of, for lack of a better word, testing them. And then with the ability to bring a player in for a workout, we can almost bring them in and almost simulate whatever we wanted to in that type of a situation, which is a big plus for us. And those workouts can happen anytime outside of the spring season. So a player that's in their senior year, for instance, and we've seen them a lot of times and we just can't make a decision, one way or the other, or, we wanted to see them face better pitching and they just haven't. We can bring them in and essentially put them into an inner squad and just let them have at it against college level pitching and use that as a tool.
want to push this a little bit further. Say you've seen these two guys over and over again, and both of them kind of have similar type results, and you've got to pick one. Which of those two guys or would you rather have on your team?
Yeah, honestly, if we weren't sold on either, we would pass on both. We've certainly been in that situation where I think we feel like with the limited roster size, if we're not sure about a player, we're going to pass, and that can be, kind of any time of year, and that's because of years of recruiting and having a full roster that, we're trying not to put ourselves in a position where we have to take, we need 2 outfielders in this class or else the whole thing's going to fall apart. We need 2 catchers or else we don't have any depth. So we don't want to put ourselves in that type of a situation. So I'd say, honestly, if we were in a position where we just weren't sold either way, we'd pass on both of them.
If you had to kind of point toward one tool for a hitter that is so important that if he doesn't have this tool, we're not going to take him. We're definitely not going to take him. Does that tool exist? And if it does, what is it?
Yeah, and you could go a lot of different ways on it, but if I had to point to one, I'd say exit velocity. And it doesn't need to be 95 to 100. But when it's 75, it's tough to see how somebody with that type of bat speed can hit mid to upper 80s fastballs. So and again, you put yourself in a situation against the conference starters that we see, if you can't touch 85-mile-an-hour fastball, then the pitcher's going to have their way with you, and kind of thinking, like, how can you get over that? There's not another way to kind of compensate if you don't have that kind of bat speed there. So if I had to point to one thing, that would kind of be, we value that metric. Other programs don't even look at it. But for us, I think that's probably one thing that I personally value, and I think we value as a program.
So what for a postseason, a regional type of Division II program in the country, just to give people an idea, what sort of exit velocity ranges do you have on your team, and how are you measuring that? Like, are you measuring it off of a tee? Are you measuring it off of front toss? Are you measuring it against live competition using a Rapsodo? Just so if a kid says, like, I have this kind of exit velocity, there's some relativity to it. He's got to measure it kind of the same way you guys do. So what kind of exit velocities do you see in your team, and when and how do you guys measure that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think one element to it is, measuring it over time. So it's not the one time the guy swung it really hard and connected perfectly and he scored a 94, but all the other scores are 83, 84. And did the radar pick up the tractor trailer on the highway behind the field, that type of a thing? Was it the pitch velocity or was it the exit velocity? So we do a lot of our kind of tracking of this would be in a batting cage in a controlled setting. I personally like to do it off of front toss. I think it allows the player to have a little bit more timing and also not be able to kind of cheat like they could off of a tee, where they kind of wind up and fire. They're hitting a moving object. Doing it off of almost a live pitching or a machine can be a little bit tougher because you're just not going to get as many good readings, essentially. Traditionally, we have used the radar gun for this and setting up radar gun behind home plate. We do have access to Rapsodo as of this fall, so we've been tinkering with that a little bit, and I think there's absolutely value to that and getting multiple readings and kind of storing information that way. But we're going to record it basically every other week in the fall for our guys, and then again, into the spring season. And I think just because when we're in the spring season, we're kind of more focused on results of, are we doing a good job with our at-bats? I kind of want to kind of take a step back on worrying about, the exit velo. If we've done a good job all fall and the beginning part of our spring semester before we start games, kind of the swinging the bat hard concept is already in there. And then, ranges that we're looking for, I'd say, the incoming, freshmen, we like to see them, in that kind of mid-80s to upper 80s range would be really acceptable for us. Looking at the frame of the player, do they look like they're going to put on size, things like that. But for the guys on our team right now, it's kind of, I'd say the high range, would be in that mid-90s, but the team as a whole, it's basically, I'd say, just a tick under 90, so maybe the 89 to 91 would be the medium for all of our guys.
Okay. Let's talk about defenders a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start in the infield, which I think, recruiting guys probably all over. They get excited probably more about a defensive shortstop than maybe any other defensive player around the field. For a lot of reasons, shortstops can move around to different positions. Shortstops, typically coaches are going to put some of their better players and better athletes at short. If you are recruiting an infielder that you think is going to play for you right away, just speaking purely defensively, taking the hitting metric out of things, what do you like to see from a defensive guy? Let's talk about infielders first. A guy that can play either shortstop, second base for you. What are you looking for? What are some tools you need to see?
Yeah, and I'd say you say shortstop, second base. My really strong recommendation for infielders is when you go to your showcase, to your camp, whatever it is, go to shortstop. Don't go to second base. You're going to have just longer throws. You're going to be able to show off your arm strength more. You may eventually be a better second baseman for whatever reason. That's perfectly fine. But when you're taking throws from second base at 45 feet, it's not able to show off your strength. So make sure you're over there at shortstop, the pro-style showcase. Everybody throws from short for a reason. So when you go and kind of have a choice of where to go to the shortstop so you can kind of show things off, show different types of plays. I think arm strength needs to be there. It can make up for a lot of other things. And arm strength, I mean, that 80 to 85 range can certainly be plenty. Certainly more than that's a plus. But for us, it's how smooth can the fielder kind of, pick up the ball and get rid of it. If we're playing at a 4-second pace, so the base runner is going to get to first base in 4 seconds, can you get rid of the ball essentially quick enough and hard enough and accurately to do that? And the player that we see on the video and looks pretty good doing some kind of, basically a practice setting or even a showcase, take 5 ground balls, different routine setting, that's great to see. And then we like that player. Then it's seeing them in a game setting. And for that player, if you're at shortstop or second, you're just going to get more balls in a game setting. And if we see a player and, we just see him take a lot of different ground balls, it's how did they react to them? How did they play on a tough surface? What they do with that, that kind of weird hop in between, a throw down from the catcher that bounced short? Did they kind of just dodge out of the way, or did they get in there and make a nice pick on it? Those things are, come into play for us because those are the realities of our game. So when we get to that point where we've identified a middle infielder in this case, we're watching everything. We're watching the in-between inning ground balls that they're taking or IO if that's a possibility as well.
What do you see from a guy that tells you that he's going to be able to stick at shortstop? If you read any scouting reports, especially for draft, in the MLB draft, you read a lot of guys are drafted as shortstops and he probably won't be able to stick at short, or this guy legitimately has a chance to stay at shortstop. So it's, a lot of guys move off that position as they move up levels for obvious reasons. But for you to watch a guy, are there 1 or 2 things you can point to that tell you, I think this guy can really actually play short in a game as opposed to having to move to first? Or, a lot of infielders end up moving to the outfield once they get to higher levels. What tools, if any, tell you that a player has a chance to stay at shortstop and be a 4-year shortstop?
Yeah, I'd say the kind of the athleticism tool, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a straight 60 time, but just being able to move in an athletic fashion, being able to make a variety of plays because of that athleticism, and that comes from watching the player, obviously. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing for us is how do they move around, how they attack the ball, things of that nature. And I think when if somebody's giving us a rec on a player and saying, I'm not sure he's a future shortstop, he does at the high school level, that's fine for them to tell us, but we'll take a look at the player, and there's a lot of unknowns of, how this player is going to physically develop by their, juniors. If they're 17 years old, how are they going to look when they're 20? Will they become more athletic, less athletic? injuries can play a part of that thing too. So, when we're looking at it, if we had to use a crystal ball, I think we, have to look at just overall athleticism of the player to say, yeah, this guy could be our shortstop of the future. But with the reality being, we don't know how is this player going to look in 2-3 years from now if they, go home over the summer and grow and get stronger, and now they're not quite as mobile. Okay, maybe they need to play a different position in the infield or as you mentioned, the outfield.
If you're at a showcase and you're watching the infield portion, would you rather see an infielder get rid of the ball very quickly and only, maybe throw the ball 80% as hard as they're able, or would you rather see a guy kind of catch it and take an opportunity to sort of wind up, crow hop, and really show off the arm? Between those two, is there, talking to, if there's a high school kid listening to this, because you see both at showcases, and I think kids are probably there saying like, well, which one should I do? I don't know. Well, what would you rather see?
Yeah, probably the first option, just the guy that's a little bit smoother, gets rid of the ball quickly, is accurate with it. The guy that does the wind-up, to me, that they look like a pitcher, and you said, this kid's probably a future pitcher. A lot of times that's what you see. So they literally, lean back and lift that front leg up like they're pitching for the mound. And sometimes they end up being two-way players in college, and that's perfectly fine too. But to me, I'd like to see the player with the better actions. They can get rid of the ball, things like that. And then that might be our determination down the road if we're recruiting him to say, not sure he can play the left side of the infield. The arm strength isn't quite there, and that would be part of our recruiting evaluation of this player that, if he comes here, he might be limited to second base or first base. But I think the player, when going to these events, kind of a big picture thing would be, play to your strengths. So if your arm, if it's a big arm, showcase that. And it's okay to lean back and fire a little bit if you're going to be throwing it 88 across the diamond. But if your arm's 80, winding up to fire at 81 opposed to 80, that's not helping you be the guy that has quick hands, gets rid of the ball cleanly, gets the ball on the first baseman's glove.
I just think back to my childhood. Sort of, I had older brother that he's 3 years older than me. He played at a good nationally ranked Division II, and he was going through Legion tryouts. This is when Legion in Pennsylvania, I don't think they even do this anymore, but when they had the Legion tryouts, and basically like you would advance different levels until you ultimately like went to the kind of the state Legion showcase. I remember that there were a pro scout at one of those things told my brother at one point that accuracy really didn't matter. In that part, people just wanted you to show off your arm. Like if he was a third baseman, and if he was a third baseman and he airmailed one and threw under the bleachers, it wasn't a big deal as long as he had a good arm. And kind of same for the outfielders. Like if you let one rip and throw it off the backstop in a showcase setting, that's okay because you're showing off your arm. Is there any truth to that, or is that a minus, is that a negative in your book if a guy kind of just winds up and lets it rip and the ball's kind of all over the place? Are you more impressed? Are you so impressed with your arm strength that it really doesn't matter, or does that factor into your decision making?
Yeah, again, really good, tough question again, Jeff. I'd say a little bit of both. So, and same thing for an outfielder, that throws it, 40 feet on a line over the catcher's head. It shows the arm strength, but it shows a total lack of, execution. So ultimately, it's great to have this big arm, but you need to be able to throw guys out. I think the idea of kind of throwing the ball into the stands, it's not as necessary now because most all of these events are able to just put a radar gun on you. So whether you throw the ball into the stands or throw it, onto the glove, the radar gun reading is going to, tell you how strong the arm is. And a lot of times there's a track record of that player, so you know what his arm strength is. So for the wow factor and maybe to get a little bit of attention, but to me, can you do both? Can you kind of wind up and really show off your hose, but put it in a place where the catcher can handle it essentially? Do you have some feel for that? That's a big part of it, and that's from the from the infield side throwing to first base, and certainly outfield. And again, the catcher pop times, we can certainly talk about, like, that's great if you're 1.7 to the second baseman catching the ball, but is it anywhere near the sliding zone?
So we can go a couple different ways with this. Let's stick with the outfield first, and another thing that I would hear as a scout out recruiting is I would hear coaches say, like, they wouldn't even pay attention to the outfield throwing portion because basically their thought was, I mean, these are pretty good coaches at pretty high levels would say, I don't care about outfield arm strength. It's like the last thing I care about with outfielders. I care much more about the other tools, and they wouldn't even really pay attention to the outfield throwing portion of it. Do you think there's any legitimacy to that? As an outfielder, is it more important to use some other things, or will arm strength alone potentially get you an opportunity? Just kind of looking to see how you view outfielders and what's important to watch, from an outfielder, especially at a showcase.
Yeah, and just to give it a little bit of perspective, I also coach third base during every game, so I evaluate the other team's arms, and I know whose arms are good and whose aren't, and the good arms out there, that changes how we coach our base runners. That changes how we try and score runs in situations. So to say it doesn't matter, I don't think that's a fair assessment. And teams certainly can build their whole programs around offense, and there is the DH. But to me, if you have such a deficit in something like arm strength in the outfield, even in one position, it can be exploited so greatly that what should be just a fly out and the runner can't tag becomes a weak fly out that you can tag on and score on because the outfielder has no chance of reaching home plate. So to me, there has to be at least some level of arm strength there, and you're going to take your pluses and minuses with guys too. So to me, I think arm strength is still important there in the outfield, just like foot speed's still important there. And do you give up a little bit of foot speed because they've got a stronger arm, or do you give up a little bit of both because they have a good bat? I think that's all part of this, but at the same token, they can't be so much behind that they, that other teams can exploit you.
Extra bases is such an important part as you move up levels. Being able to prevent extra bases, being able to take extra bases on offense. Those things are they win a lot of games. They win and lose a lot of games.
Absolutely.
Whether you're talking about a defensive outfielder, maybe a true center fielder, or a guy that can really play shortstop, is there a room on a college roster for a guy who can really, really play defense, but is like borderline being able to hit at your level? Is there enough value in defense for you to bring a guy on like that and hope you can, either take a chance of winning with a guy that can really, really play short when he hits ninth and he's just not a real big factor on offense? Is there room enough for that, or is that a valuable enough tool for you to maybe take a flyer on a guy like that, or do you need to see the offensive piece as well?
For me, I'd ideally like to see an offensive piece in there, or at least flashes of it. But the reality is, I know the exact type of player that you're talking about, and I think we hear that from the catcher perspective too. I think our approach is, we want to be able to hit 1 through 9. So a batter that's a complete, a liability that, there's nothing positive going to come out of an at-bat, that's going to be a tough player for us to move forward on. The player that is committed to getting better and just isn't great yet, at the plate, but we see that, there's something to work with, and we feel like we can help transform this player as a hitter. But I think and you see it, I think particularly defensively, the catcher and the shortstop are like so committed, and they work so hard at being good at defense. They never take the time to take the number of swings, and then even when they do get into the batting cage, into game settings, you can see they just take a defensive approach to hitting because that's what their whole mindset is about the game. So for me, it's the ability piece, sure, but also through the recruiting process, if we're recruiting that player we think is so advanced defensively, it's part of it would be my conversation with the player about, okay, what are you doing to improve your offensive skills? Like, how do you feel about yourself as a hitter? And it might be, just never kind of figured it out, but I want to, and here's some things. So it's a little bit of a conversation piece, and do we think we can help this player become a hitter over time? So the short answer is, if they're such a plus defender that they can be a late inning substitution for you in the middle infield, there's a plus there. But you can't have too many of those guys. You can't fill your roster, certainly, or even have, again, with our roster limitations, we can't have an outfielder, an infielder, a catcher that are all just defensive specialists, so to speak. We could have potentially one guy that we feel like, wow, this is a difference maker on defense, but you got to pick and choose where you're going to use them. That makes it pretty tough. It's a tough sell, I think, especially since there's so many players out there. So, we can say this player is really good defensively, but we can probably find another player that's maybe a tick lower on the defensive side, but brings a whole lot more to the table offensively.
Okay. Let's finish this up, Ross, so you're not on the phone for an hour and a half here. Let's finish up talking about catchers.
Mm-hmm.
You're out evaluating catchers at a showcase, again, a kind of a tough setting, but I think a setting that a lot of players out there experience. A lot of catchers are cheating to get their pop times and things like that. So you probably see some pop times that just aren't very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So at a showcase, what are you looking for? Kind of throwing pop times out the window. What are you looking for at a showcase in a catcher to figure out who you're interested in and who you're going to cross off the list?
Yeah. I think an important piece to this, and we talk about this with our own catchers, when we run our camps, when I talk to catchers specifically, if you look at statistics of, and I suggest catchers do this, if you're looking at programs, look at the statistics of stolen bases against for a team, for instance. So, in a standard season for us, stolen bases against, we're probably only going to have maybe 2 stolen bases against us per game. And it might be, and a lot of times it's lower than that.
Stolen base attempts.
Stolen base attempts. And, hopefully we throw out one of those 2 runners or both of them. But straight steals in our conference and against kind of what we see, it's very low. There's a few teams in our conference that we know are going to run a whole lot. And every program in the country is a little different, but kind of looking at that, so we, what's going into that's not all arm strength in terms of controlling the running game. But what that means is essentially 2 times a game, the catcher is going to be called on to do an actual pop, like catch a pitch and make the third or second base or third base and be perfectly on time and all that. They're going to catch 150 pitches. So to us, yes, the arm strength's important. Yes, the pop time's important, but more important to us is how does the catcher receive? How does the catcher block? How does the catcher kind of manage the game, manage emotions of his players, of the umpire, of the pitcher, all that. So so I think just to put it in perspective for us, they have to have a good arm, but the pop time being in that 2.0 to 2.2 range, a realistic pop time, that's plenty for us. So for me, it's receiving pitches. So when I'm looking at catchers specifically, I prefer to watch them in a real game setting rather than, the coach is throwing pitches from 20 feet away, and they kind of know where the pitch is going. So to me, it's, how are they receiving pitches, particularly when the pitcher misses his spot? And the drill that we do a good amount, and I'm going to add some video to the website as we talked about, is having our catchers set up in the location and receive a pitch that's a strike, but not in that location. So set up inside the pitches, middle, outside. How do they receive that pitch to make it still look like a strike? And that's a really big part of catching, how many strikes you can get for your pitcher opposed to lose. And we don't quite have the technology as Major League Baseball has to be able to kind of show that, how many pitches a catcher steals. But just being able to make pitches look believable and not turning strikes into balls essentially is a big part of that. And we see that, can a catcher essentially receive without taking the pitch out of the strike zone with their glove or their body, the blocking piece. And, for us, again, it's a game setting. I can see essentially how, or certainly radar, how hard is this pitcher throwing. So if the pitcher is throwing 77 and the breaking ball is at 65 and this catcher is having a really tough time handling the change of speeds at that level, How are they going to catch a pitcher that throws 88 with a 80-mile-an-hour breaking ball? And again, that's just the receiving end. So the catcher can have a great arm, but they can't catch the ball first. So to me, that's going to be a little bit more important than just straight pop time. Pop time's a nice tool to have and tells you basically about one piece of the game, but there's a lot more that I think is more valuable at our level, certainly.
Okay. So in the showcase setting, that they're guys just kind of getting 3 live throws down to second base. Are you still interested in the pure arm strength? Are you looking at the transfer? Looking at how well the ball carries? Are you looking at how accurate the throws are? Besides, again, kind of throwing pop times out the window, is that what a catcher should kind of be prepared to show you at a showcase, or is there something else that you're looking at, whether it maybe be footwork or how game-like he makes the transfer and the throw down to second base? What are you looking at specifically in a showcase setting? What can you get out of a showcase?
Yeah, and it's for me, I get made fun of by my fellow coaches out there that I kind of watch everything and take note on everything. So, I'm watching everything. So that when you do have the showcase time to just make the throws to second base and you get a chance to throw 3 balls down, I'm absolutely watching to say, okay, how's it look? And I'm also noting what the time was, but what did your mechanics look like? Did you stand up on that one? Were you cheating terribly, where you were kind of upright and sideways before you received it? And also, was the throw on line? So you get those 5 throws, 3 throws, whatever it may be. And similar to what we talked about with the hitting, in terms of repeating, are you repeating your mechanics of your throw each time, or does it look a little bit different? And, noting, does it look like it's all arm strength, or is it arm and body together? And sometimes it's that guy who's, body and feet are doing the right thing, but the arm strength just isn't there yet, and kind of be there. So I'm kind of looking at the whole thing, and the next level would definitely be in the game situation. So showcase style or tournament style, catcher throw down the ball down to second base in between every inning. I recommend asking your pitcher not to throw a curveball to you when it's your chance to throw down in between innings or throw a pitch in the dirt, and not to do like a half throw down, like from the pitcher side of things. The pitcher should wind up and give the catcher a good fastball to throw down on. So I'm going to look at those throws, and then definitely the in-game throws. So the 1 or 2 times in a game you might have the opportunity to throw a runner out. What does that look like? And certainly, you always want to have your hand on your stopwatch. You might miss it, but you can just use your eyes to be, okay, that guy threw it down there right around 2 seconds. He put it on the bag, or he had an opportunity to throw this guy out and sailed it into center field, and was falling off to the side, on his throwing side, and didn't follow through, etc. He was shocked by the fact that this guy, who looked like a good base stealer, stole on him. Those types of things definitely get thrown in there, and that's whether it's a showcase setting, a tournament setting, or a state championship setting we're seeing a player in.
Okay. One last question, and then I'm gonna let you go.
Sure.
When you're recruiting, maybe use a different term, but I'm sure the same thing exists. I use the term raw a lot when I was watching a kid. This player is pretty raw. Do you have a term that you use to, I'm assuming that you have an idea what I mean by that. Do you have a term that you use to kind of mean the same type of thing? And if you watch a player and you consider him to be a raw player, what does that mean? And is that, how does that factor into recruiting a guy? Like, do you see a guy that's, when I say raw, Ross, I just mean, I think this kid has not really been coached that much. I think I can coach up his swing and fix his mechanics a little bit. Or, if I see a catcher, sometimes you feel like you watch a catcher and think like, well, I bet this guy hasn't been catching very long. He just is kind of, there's a lot of things to clean up with him. There's a lot of things that we can kind of shore up his mechanics, et cetera. If you see that in a player, how does that factor into recruiting a guy, as far as how much you like him, how much you don't, or how much you're willing to take a chance on somebody?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the pitcher as well with that. How long has this guy been pitching? Boy, it doesn't look like it. He's been pitching for much. So the term I think we might use a little bit more would be polished or unpolished, but meaning the same thing as toolsy or not toolsy or raw. So to me, I think it's knowing a little bit of the backstory on the player is important, and with the high school player in particular, I mentioned to you, our shortstop, and, he played football, but he was very polished as an infielder, as a hitter. That had to do with his work ethic, athleticism, and all that. But when we see that, it may be that we see the player first, and then we go to find more information on him, or the flip side, we get information on the player from the high school coach, the club coach, whatever. So it might be the club coach who says, hey, this kid just picked up a ball, after so many months off because he was playing football, and, we're exploring pitching, and he's throwing the ball really hard, but you can tell by the video, he's not a polished pitcher yet. He's not, essentially, he doesn't know what he's doing up there. So that goes into play for us. The age of the player, absolutely. So, is this kid in December of his senior year as compared to December of his junior year? So is there time for there to be development? The growth spurt is definitely part of that too. So you look at the player, and maybe a player you've seen over a couple of years, but they just shoot up 6 inches, and now what was polished is not, because they're still, now they're really figuring out their body. They seem uncoordinated would be a word that I use a lot. Their mechanics are uncoordinated with whatever the skill set may be. So to me, it's getting the full picture. So you talk to the parents, oh, he shot up six inches. You talk to the coach, we just moved him to the mound, or we just got him off the mound so he could focus on hitting. Getting that story. A sidearm pitcher is another one. Some sidearm pitchers seem like, wow, they really know what they're doing up there because they've been doing it for a while, or it's, this kid has not been doing it for a while. It looks very, very fresh, very new, very, again, unpolished to us. So I think knowing the story behind it, and again, with our recruiting style of, needing guys to come in pretty close to being able to get on the field, we want to see there's some movement in the right direction there. And it may be telling the player, right now we're not able to move on you, but let's see how you progress. And if you're a senior and it's December, let's see how your spring goes. If you don't want to wait because you've got other options, that's perfectly fine. But for us, it's, let's wait till we see a little bit of development there, a little bit going in the right direction. And for us, we have that flexibility with admissions being rolling admissions, with our roster being tight. But, there's always changes. And if, in terms of being done recruiting, if there's a player that comes up in June or July that's, popping 92 and is looking for a home, we may not be done with your class after all. That piece definitely comes up, and the coach are like, all right, we got to explore. We got to at least explore this. Even though we thought we were done with 2020, let's at least have this conversation here. But I think that player that is raw, it's getting more information about them, and on the baseball side, it's more video, more time to see him, however it may be, and then finding out the story behind it. Why are they, say, 17 or 18 and still very raw? And if it's simply, which it definitely can be, a lack of coaching, then that's the story. And then we take it from there. We get to know the kid, and we think, hey, this kid matches what we're looking for athletically, and we've talked to this kid. We spent time with him. We've worked with him in a camp setting or a showcase setting, and hey, this is a guy we want to work with, and we think we can build up. And that's that, the personal side of it.
It's a great answer, and it's I don't know if there's a kid out there anywhere that considers himself to be raw, but I think there's plenty of coaches that you talk to that say,
sure,
hey, I've got a kid here, he's really interesting. Like that's a term that a lot of high school coaches use a lot. He's interesting. That usually means there's something wrong with him, but there's something maybe you're going to like about him. So.
And I think I'm not doing my job, and I'm not doing a service to kind of those contacts, those coaches that are taking the time to reach out to me. If I don't at least hear that coach out, hear a little bit what the story is there, let me get the information, then I can kind of give direction. And if Westchester is not the place for whatever those reasons are, then I can at least give them a reason and give them a little bit of direction too. And just, because it may come back to serve Westchester very well down the road with this particular player or the next guy.
Really great, Ross. This is Ross Trachtenberg, everybody. He's the recruiting coordinator at Westchester University, taking a lot of time out of his day today to be with us to talk about recruiting and to try to give some insights as to what a nationally ranked Division II recruiting coordinator is looking for at different positions, kind of what you're thinking when you see guys, your different processes. So it's been great just sharing some information from you and having this conversation, Ross. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend your afternoon with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's fun talking the baseball side of things. A lot of times we get hung up a little bit too much on the other pieces, which are also very important, the academics, the personality and all that. It's nice to talk about just the baseball side, which is a lot of times what's a little tougher to appreciate without kind of going through it like this. So it was great on my end too.
Yeah, and it's tough to really know, even among recruiting coordinators. Two recruiting coordinators don't look at things the same way, and but I think it's just valuable information for people to see what's going on in your mind when you're out there. So appreciate your time again. You can catch Ross Trachtenberg videos for free at figureitoutbaseball.com. He's got a lot of them on there, and I've been told there are more coming, so that's a pretty exciting thing for the website. Hopefully you'll check them out when you get a chance. And Ross, once more, just appreciate you being here today and wish you and your family and your team all the best.
Thank you very much, Jeff.